I'm Geoff Angulo, your host and moderator, and I also lead the strategy and transactions practice at the Carnwright Group. Joining me as co-host today is my colleague Kyle Vano, who leads Carnwright's Energy Transition and Sustainability Group. Kyle and I would like to welcome our three esteemed guests: Robin Fielder, Executive Vice President, Low Carbon Strategy and Chief Sustainability Officer at Talos Energy; Peter Casera, Head of Energy Transition North America at Trafigura; and Ajay Jagadizian, Senior Technical Advisor at Oaktree Capital Management. Welcome, and let's jump into the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been talking about energy transition, and those conversations have increased over recent years. I've also sensed there's a lot of confusion about what it really means. And I think it'd be nice to set the stage now to get that conversation going. So Kyle, how do you define energy transition?
Yeah, so energy transition really has taken on a broad definition, and there has been a lot of confusion on what it means. And in its simplest sense, energy transition is exactly that. It's a transition from one fuel source to the next. And what we've seen is it's nothing new. We've been doing it our entire history. We've gone from whale oil to coal to fossil fuels, and now we're looking at new low carbon technologies and green technologies like wind and solar. I think the biggest thing that's changed with this energy transition is in the past, it was driven by reliability and economic prosperity. Yeah. This time, the narrative is really driven by decarbonization, reducing global emissions. And that's really where this energy transition has changed from prior and historical changes. So I know energy transition can mean different things at different parts of the value chain. How are you guys thinking about it in your respective parts of the investment world, the trading world, and even the upstream world?
Yeah. So I think, like you mentioned, I think the word transition says it all. It's just in this context, I would just say that it's just moving from what we have right now, which is fossil fuel-based power sources, to more of the renewables, like wind and solar, and talks about fusion, happening right now. So it's fascinating. Like 4 or 5 years ago, it was all happening in different silos. The word energy transition had not caught on, but now you look everywhere. It's a buzzword. And everyone's talking about it. So, it's very pertinent, what we're talking about here today.
I think from the trading side, our role as commodity traders and supply chain managers is really matching producers and consumers of fuels, metals, whatever it may be. So I think here in energy transition, for us, it's a lot of the challenge that we're having is really a supply side constraint today. I think the consumer is aware that no or low carbon fuels are what they need to be transitioning towards. I think there's a push from companies, from individuals, from governments to move in that direction. And the constraint that we see, I think the challenge to be solved at least first, is really finding supply into those markets to make those choices available for consumers. So I think that's where we find a lot of the focus from the Trafigura side for energy transition is how can we unlock and support and underwrite new supply of new types of technology or lower carbon fuels.
Yeah, as a upstream or exploration and production operator, I think it's not just transition. I think about it as transformation and really evolution as we think about even just how upstream oil and gas has evolved over the last several decades. I think it's about evolving and continuing to improve our footprints and how we do our operations in a very safe and environmentally responsible manner, continue to reduce emissions as much as we can. And look to find ways to capitalize on our competitive advantages and skill sets. And so that's where, we're getting into the CCS space, working as doing decarbonization solutions for others. So it's the end use of our products. But we also see that as a way to move into a new blue economy. So it's kind of playing both sides of the house and be an enabler, having a CCS solution in place for whether it's blue fuels or other blue products that can be decarbonized on the front end.
And I think that's a very important word that you use. It's not necessarily a transition. That's almost a fallacy when you think about energy transition.
That's right.
You think about it from a transformation standpoint, it's more practical in sense. And when you look at past transitions, we're still burning wood chips. We had this conversation the other day. The coal facilities are coming back online to answer some of the energy supply and the demand needs that are happening. So I think there's a stat out there. It's taken 50 years for one new fuel source to become 25% of the supply. So it's going to happen over time. And it's not saying we're going to immediately shut off the taps and get rid of fossil fuel. I think we have to look at it in a pragmatic way from a transformation standpoint, not a transition standpoint.
Yeah, I think, Robin, you hit it on the head. It's just it's not just finding new sources of energy. It's more of the existing sources of energy and how we can decarbonize those as much as possible. And CCUS has come a long way. And I think we're still in the second or third inning in that. But I think that's going to be a very helpful technology before we transition out to fully renewable sources or like majority of renewable energy sources.
Fantastic. There are a few other terms that are bandied about these days that are creating confusion in the marketplace. And in many cases, I think they're interrelated, but also uniquely or distinct. For example, energy transition, ESG, and sustainability. Robin, can you share some thoughts on how those are interlinked and how they're not, and how people should be thinking about them?
Yeah, sure. I think of sustainability as a really broad umbrella. I think true sustainability is about strategy. And within that, you certainly have the various elements of ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, and how, really good, responsible companies run their business, how they take care of their people, their assets, and their communities, and do all that inside a nice governed umbrella. And then energy transition is just kind of what's going, as Kyle pointed out, is what's going on around us. And so being able to use that strategy to position yourself, look at what you bring to the table. Again, as an operator, we know that we've got the expertise in the subsurface. And so that's where CCS made a lot of sense for us when we think about sequestration and being able to characterize the subsurface and actually do the operations to drill a well, monitor a well, and operate that long term. It's really putting all those puzzle pieces together. And for us, it started with a sustainability goal and wanting to build out an ESG committee. And doing CCS is just one of many things that we're looking at that fall into, we have a 10 subcommittee team looking at all things that fall into this broad category.
Yep, that's great. And we've also seen, ESG become the mechanism from which we measure the performance around the sustainability piece. And it's really been used somewhat in the investment community to monitor performance of those assets. LPs and GPs might be thinking about ESG as a way to divert capital and look at new investments, and you see difference of, is it a primary kind of criterion or is it a secondary criterion? So ESG has become that conversation in the market of how do I measure that performance around sustainability, and then energy transition plays a role in supporting that overall ESG narrative. So how are you guys thinking about it from an Oaktree perspective?
Yeah, I think very similarly. I think the way I think about it is just a ESG as a framework or a means to an end to get into, in this case, more of a sustainable production. In my mind, but personally, I think I put security before sustainability. Especially, that's a very pertinent topic, today, as we have the crisis unfold in Europe. It's come into light that you need energy security first, and that actually does not derail the sustainable goals, but it actually enhances it. So, and the same thing with the fossil fuels. As we transition into the energy sources, the renewable energy sources, we need fossil fuels to bridge that gap. Maybe it's moved to more of a natural gas, and then completely into renewable energy sources. So that's kind of how we are thinking about it broadly.
I think the point you make on the bridge fuels is interesting. And I think our observation, I think everyone around the table's observation has probably been, there's incremental improvements that can be made across all sorts of operations that have nothing to do with going from a full fossil fuel or hydrocarbon-based economy to a full green hydrogen world in the future. Yeah. So there's a lot of focus, I think we've all seen, around methane intensity as sort of what I think is going to end up being a defining attribute of U.S. natural gas as it is exported to other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, where it's getting more and more needed. And I think there's a lot of focus that companies have just on looking inward at operations and where can you find efficiencies, where are things that you can improve. Again, I think fugitive emissions is a great example of that make dollars and cents that help move your fuel to a lower carbon intensity from a life cycle emissions perspective.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, I mean, Robin, you brought up the G aspect of ESG and the governance, and Peter, you're talking about looking internally of how do I decarbonize my internal assets through operating efficiency, asset efficiency. You talk about the setting up the committees, and that makes sure that there's alignment from these ESG sustainability initiatives between the board all the way down to production foreman and superintendent. So those committees are also significantly important from a governance aspect that helps support some of that environmental decarbonization as well.
That's right. You really have to put the accountability in place. So we've got kind of the subject matter technical experts in the various disciplines, whether it's cybersecurity, enterprise risk, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or even how are we going to participate through an energy transition. And that's where our CCS and our Talos Low Carbon Solutions business was built out of that one sub-team. But that group reports up through me and up through our board's Safety, Sustainability, and Corporate Responsibility Committee, and into the broader board. So you've got these kind of checks and balances to ensure that we've got the buy-in, that we're thinking about things in a smart manner, it's not about checking boxes, it's about setting up the energy company of tomorrow, attracting the right talent, making sure we've got our defenses up for what may go bump in the night. That's just a matter of good governance. But again, also looking internally to see what key skill sets do I have, what capabilities, what expertise can I use through any kind of transition, transformation, or evolution, and position myself, again, back to that strategy, to be very successful in that and competitive in that space.